All right, so I'm Andrew Costis. I'm a threat researcher at Carbon Black. My talk today is on LoL-Bins behaving badly. I just wanted to start by thanking all the B-Sides organisers and everyone that's been involved, and thank you for selecting my talk. It's a great honour to be here. So good job, everyone. And like the venue, but need a bit of air conditioning maybe for next year. So a little bit about me. Most of my colleagues know me as AC. So I've been doing threat research slash malware analysis for about 4 years, but I've been in the tech industry as a whole for about 17 years. So it's funny how I kind of got into it. So my background is quite varied. So I've done hardware to software to data center to field engineering, technical support, sysadmin, kind of a bit of everything, and just kind of being exposed to so many different technologies has kind of helped me to kind of do more what I wanted to do. So yeah, quite a varied background. I don't sort of do Twitter. I am on Twitter, but I use it more for sort of research. Looking at any new malware hashes that get posted, or any of the AV vendors or other researchers that might post some interesting information. So I specifically work in our threat analysis unit for Carbon Black. So we have about a team of about 16 people. And we're kind of scattered all over the world. We're all remote. So out of the 16 of us, we're kind of broken into 4 focus groups. So I work on a team of 4 looking at e-crime and commodity malware. We've got other teams that do kind of internal support, so building and supporting tools for us guys to use. And we have an APT nation state team, and then we have kind of more of a product kind of focused team that are more experts at the how the products work. And that is a picture of my dog showing no signs of reading practical malware analysis. So quick rundown of the agenda. So my plan is to kind of make a few definitions to anyone that's kind of not clear on some of the stuff I'm going to cover. And then I'm going to actually step through some examples. So I'm going to start off simple, talking about some ransomware campaigns and families that I've looked at over the last 6 months. And then kind of move on to some of the more advanced techniques, banking Trojans, and how they're leveraging LoL-Bins. And if we've got time, and please be nice if we do have time, please ask me some questions that I might have a clue how to answer. So starting from LoL-Bins then. So what is a LoL-Bin? So living off the land binary. So this is any, application or binary that comes preloaded with whatever flavor of operating system. Helps if I click next. Why is that not working? Laptops now. It's a good start. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so living off the land. So these are binaries that come preloaded. So common things such as PowerShell, WMI, Windows scripting host, and lots of others. There's actually some very unusual ones that you probably wouldn't even think to look at that are being used every day by malware actors. Really wanted to just mention, so there's a guy that's based in Norway, Oddvar Mo. He's done not only a brilliant talk about the history behind how the term LoL-Bins first came about, but he also manages and maintains a GitHub project where it's basically an inventory of the different file names for different Windows, LoL-Bins. So highly recommend to check them out. I reached out to him because there was a specific malware family that I was looking at, and there was a particular LoL-Bin that it's not very well documented, and it wasn't on his GitHub page, and he's super responsive. So yeah, if you encounter any LoL-Bins in your day-to-day world, I'd definitely recommend hitting him up. I've got a PowerPoint's going to crash on me. So you didn't see that, but I did actually have an error message pop up here. Come on. Yeah, it looks like my PowerPoint has completely died, so let me just restart this real quick. Apologies. which is a good way of killing 5 minutes. Okay, maybe the clicker's completely broken. Okay, let's try that. It seems to be lagging somewhat, so I'm just going to try and talk about what's on the slides before it crashes again. So another definition, so commodity malware. So most people know malware. When they talk about malware, they typically think about APT, so advanced persistent threat. But in actual fact, kind of first-hand experience is that APTs aren't always as advanced as what people think. So if anything, they're more adaptive because they're very well financially backed. They're very well highly resourced. In terms of the people behind the APT campaigns and the nation-state campaigns. They're usually after a specific goal, whether it's corporate espionage, whether it's blueprints to the latest F-35 stealth fighter or whatever the case may be. There's enough indications as to who the usual culprits are. We're not going to go there. So typically, or if anything, APT should probably be labeled as adaptive because they're designed to be adaptive and just kind of stay off the radar in the typical corporate environment. In contrast to that, and I've got another error. This is not going well. So in contrast to that, commodity malware. So that's pretty much everything else. So most people think that keyloggers, ransomware, yeah, this stuff's been around for years. It's not that sophisticated. In actual fact, from what we're seeing, at least in our team, is that the sophistication level and the advanced level of commodity malware is actually improving somewhat over recent times. Generally speaking, not just ransomware, but even banking Trojans are looking for specific targets. They're looking to kind of infect as many systems as possible if we're talking about ransomware, or maybe just a specific company if we're talking about banking Trojans. But either way, there's a very on a technical level, while the motives and the intent might be slightly different, there's actually a very close technical overlap between the two. For example, malware, nation-state malware often uses LoL-Bins, as does commodity malware. They both use obfuscation methods. They both use ways to hide themselves from people like me in terms of anti-analysis, sandbox escaping or whatever. So just to kind of clear up any issues with those. So next big buzzword has been around for the last couple of years. So if anyone hasn't heard of MITRE ATT&CK, I hate to tell you, you may have been living under a rock. But really, really helpful. So effectively, it's a knowledge base of adversary behaviors. So historically, if we so there's a model that a guy created, David Bianco, back in 2013 called the Pyramid of Pain. Recommend to check it out. But at the bottom, you have IOCs. Now, IOCs, I'm not saying are pointless or they serve no purpose, but in the age of Emotet, and I know at the keynote, Emotet was mentioned. And the reason why Emotet specifically gave a lot of the blue team a big headache, was because the IOCs were changing all the time. So it's very, very difficult to keep track of when you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of samples and hashes that are changing. There are only valid ones, and then have a very short shelf life, or low TTL if you like. So enter the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So it's effectively a knowledge base of behaviors. So rather than map into IOCs, which expire very quickly, you can kind of abstract that at a higher level, and not just from a blue team, but also for red teaming, pen testing, adversary simulation, and just basically using the framework to kind of measure your security, measure your effectiveness, perform gap analysis, and so on. And as a quick example, this is just a slide taken from the MITRE framework. I'm sure some of you here have seen this before, but this is just one of the uses. So from a researcher's perspective, it's quite useful to be able to compare different APT campaigns and looking at the behaviors that they share and what's common, because that might help to kind of track going forward. That may help with hunting and other reasons as well. So MITRE ATT&CK is not a bulletproof, silver bullet kind of approach to this is going to fix everything. But if you haven't, encountered it, as yet, definitely check out their website. There's some really good information. Fundamentally, how it works is the column headers, if you like, at the top represent the goal of the attacker, and then the cell underneath each column represents the tactic or technique used. And their website's great because you can obviously drill in and get specific examples of, exfiltration, C2, or lateral movement examples, and so on. So, touch wood, we're still working, so that's good. So we're going to move on to some quick examples of ransomware. So we're going to start off with some simpler examples. So this particular ransomware campaign came out a couple of months ago, brought down some government government kind of services across North America. It's quite an interesting sample. So most ransomware that I've personally dealt with is written in .NET. This is actually written in Go language. I'm not saying that we're seeing a huge uptake in malware written in Go, but it was probably one of the first Go written or coded ransomware strains that I've personally encountered. So that's quite interesting. This particular ransom note was quite interesting as well because after 4 days, it was prompting the victim to make an additional $10,000 payment after the 4th day and for each day thereafter. So again, like the psychology behind ransomware. But digging into this particular sample, doesn't take long to kind of see some common tactics and techniques delivered. So at the top, we've got the process. So we've got basically the executable that spawns command prompt, which spawns net, and it basically does a net use. This is not so common. This is quite an interesting command because it basically just disconnects all network drives. So typically ransomware has worm kind of capability built in. So ultimately, if we, if common aim for the malware author is to kind of infect and spread, because ultimately, if they can infect more people, then there's more chance that they're going to receive payment, right? So this command is quite unusual for a regular user to run. And so just by knowing the attack ID, which is in green, so attack ID T1126, it falls under the defense evasion column, if you like, and then it's network share connection removal. And there's a whole load of other information about this particular command. As I say, I'm going to start simple. But these are quite these aren't unique to ransomware, but these are just very common commands, LoL-Bins, that I see very, very often. So again, sc.exe does a stop, but actually stops 180 something services all in one go. So you actually see, if you're monitoring, you actually see 180 odd command prompts all spawning, and each individually doing a stop of whichever service name. And included in that was a pre-compiled list of services, not just antivirus, but also backup, disaster recovery, virtualization, SQL, Microsoft Exchange, a load of other services to just try and stop all those services running as quickly as possible. It's a common tactic for kind of counter IR, so trying to make people's our lives difficult essentially. But again, the attack ID is in green, so services stop, disabling of security tools, very common to ransomware. Again. Kind of not going to go too much in depth, but WevTutil. So again, it's a LoL-Bin that comes with Windows, has been around for years, effectively used to clear the Windows event logs. Really, really common technique used in ransomware. Again, another counter IR technique. BCD edit. So ransomware typically doesn't want you to recover your system. So how it will do that it will basically disable the automatic startup recovery and repair screen, so that the next time Windows boots up, it's kind of game over. So again, attack IDs in green, indicator removal on host. In other words, indicator being the artifacts of the Windows event logs. And a common one is obviously inhibiting system recovery, and that's really, which you'll see shortly, but that one pops up a lot. Another strain of ransomware, so this kind of cropped up at the start of the year, very, very similar to WannaCry and NotPetya. So it contains the Eternal Blue exploit embedded in it. Uses a pool of onion addresses, kind of fairly normal for ransomware. It drops the Windows shadow copies, so really kind of typical. And how it does that is it has a Visual Basic script, and it executes that, which then executes WMIC, which then executes the delete shadow copies. The shadow copies are there for legitimate reasons as part of Windows System Restore, and also your third-party backup applications will use shadow copies if you're using snapshot provider type backup technologies. So again, common way of just trying to clear down the system, hide all the evidence as quickly as possible, and move on to the next victim. So kind of going through this exercise with a few more samples with specifically ransomware, you can kind of see and build your table how you want, or this is kind of a way of just showing you the usefulness of the of the understanding of the MITRE ATT&CK framework and how the LoL-Bins fit in. So as you can see, and I've just kind of mapped 5 or 6 or 7 ransomware families. And you can see highlighted in green, inhibiting system recovery is quite a common theme amongst ransomware rather. But also, understanding the common LoL-Bins that keep cropping up will help you to kind of zoom in within your network, whether it's from a detection standpoint or whether it's from a hunting standpoint. You can start to look at, okay, why is that user that's in finance running BCD edit, or why is this user running SC commands or whatever, out of hours or whatever. So the idea is to kind of use your own kind of intelligence to kind of perform gap analysis, understanding, doing evaluating your assets, obviously your defenses, and there's loads of ways that you could kind of use this to kind of measure, in terms of count, priority. You could start using it to tag things, and that's just all from a free framework that has been around for the last couple of years. So moving on to a couple of banking Trojan examples. So this particular banking Trojan, NanoCore, has actually been around for a couple of years. So this was quite interesting because it used quite an oldish, 2017, I believe, the CVE for Microsoft Office equation editor. So the equation editor is something that comes shipped with Microsoft Office, has done for quite a few years. But specifically what was interesting about this was that it hides itself as a JPEG file. It downloads a JPEG file, but it's actually a PE file or executable file. The PE file is actually compiled with a piece of third-party software called AutoHotkey. I don't know if anyone's familiar with AutoHotkey, but basically it's used for creating aimbots for gaming. Other legitimate uses as well, like for example, if you wanted to demonstrate stuff without a click of a button, you can pre-program it through macros, from my understanding. So this particular executable was embedded using third-party software, and you can actually, it basically comes with a compiler where you can compile an executable. So this particular campaign had multiple levels of obfuscation, and part of that was a LoL-Bin embedded within one of the scripts, and there was a load of base64 encoding, and they were actually using a lot of the libraries that come with AutoHotkey to do all the obfuscation. But essentially, what it's actually looking for is a hard-coded path to the .NET framework folder within the Windows directory, and it's actually calls out to a tool called RegJSM. So RegJSM is an assembly registration tool, and it's basically used to compile .NET framework type binaries, effectively .NET code, right? So once that RegJSM ran, this particular code, it then kind of proceeded to the next stage, which was to install the remote access Trojan, and it persisted through the registry, and it set up a keylogger, and it was storing its own database in the temp directory for anything like copy and paste, and anything copied or even typed from the user's end would be saved, cached, and then sent back through the C2. Another one that I was looking at just about a month or so ago. So Ursnif, again, isn't anything new. It's been around for a long time. It was formerly known as a different actor or group, if you like, behind it. But the source code behind it got leaked, and then it got forked, and then it just became Ursnif quite a few years ago. But this has been doing the rounds for a long time. They're very much active. kind of up in their game all the time. They have heavy anti-analysis, which makes my job hard, and they have rapidly changing C2s. One particular day I was looking at a new sample that, to the best of my knowledge, no one else was looking at. I was quickly able to get onto the admin dashboard of the C2. Unfortunately, it went offline very quickly, but it's interesting to see, obviously, the facilities behind the C2 controller. So obviously they've got a dashboard for their clients, how many clients are infected, probably OS flavors, the modules that they can load, because banking Trojans are typically very modular. Obviously users, so if they've got, you know, a team of people that need access to this admin console, and probably other settings as well for throttling. So again, this particular sample, so when the executable runs, typically it will execute run DLL32, which then executes CMD, then PowerShell, then CSC, then CVTres. So I'm going to go into a bit of detail about that. So run DLL32, so it's a legitimate process, so it typically spawns you know, exported or shared DLLs. It's very, very common. What's not so common is when you see something like a shell exec run DLL highlighted in red. So basically what that's doing is it's basically so it's kind of like a common way to kind of create a backdoor, if you like, through a PowerShell output, and then kind of triggered through CMD, but then indirectly through run DLL. This is actually quite common for products like Cobalt Strike and PowerShell Empire as well. But obviously, if you know, again, if you kind of are responsible for looking at your LoL-Bins in your estate, then, you know, run DLL32 activity, don't overlook it, because you can obviously do a lot of damage. So again, attack ID, run DLL32. Next ones that I mentioned was CSC and CVTres. So CSC is the C# compiler, so kind of similar to the RedJSM that I mentioned. So this is quite interesting. So CSC.exe and CVTres.exe. CVTres was actually not listed on the GitHub page that I mentioned before. So that's what prompted me to hook up with Odvamo, who's kind of looking into it as well with me at the moment. But what's kind of interesting is, again, files were pulled down through a remote web server, and then they're effectively built on the fly. Typically, you know, kind of unusual to be, well, maybe not unusual, but you know, potentially to be building out and compiling you know, .NET code or C# code from, you know, the Windows temp folder. That may or may not be usual in your environment, but it's something to think about. Typically, if you're a developer, you might have Visual Studio, you may have a path where you're going to save all your, you know, your projects and so on. So again, this isn't like a silver bullet, but it's hopefully helpful to kind of see where malware and how malware is using the LoL-Bins, and it raises questions. So kind of going back to the ransomware table that I produced, you could produce something very similar as well. And the last example is one that cropped up earlier this year. So Schlayer. So this is something that got picked up around last year. Now, our threat research team is kind of a funny story behind this. So one of my colleagues is a very keen beer brewer and in the States, and he was just kind of browsing around some forums and then on his Mac, and he was presented with some kind of, obviously, you know, quite well, kind of legitimate looking Adobe Flash Player update, which obviously kind of saw it as a bit of a red flag. And this is how we started tracking Schlayer, because it actually turned out to be quite a relevant piece of Mac malware. And how it works is essentially there's multiple hijacked web servers serving up ads and fake Adobe installers and whatnot. Those would come in different forms, typically DMG files, but other files like zips and ISOs and package files. And some of the samples, not all, would also include a crypto mining element to it as well. But this particular campaign was quite interesting because it used multiple layers of obfuscation. So it would unpack, and then it would create it, whatever it unpacked, into a hidden file. Then it would download something else and repeat and repeat. Interestingly, these particular samples were also signed by Apple developer IDs, like actual developer IDs. So we got onto Apple, and fortunately they got taken down. But what's kind of relevant to this is a lot of the tools used, LoL-Bins, also apply to Mac as well. So of course we mostly think about the Windows world, but XXD. So this tool was used to perform the attack and what the malware, how the malware played out. Also, OpenSSL uses curl, UID, and there was also some other script as well called the security auth trampoline, which actually we had to reach out to MITRE ATT&CK for, because there wasn't even a TTP for that, because it was quite a new technique specifically targeting Macs. But kind of interesting because, you don't always think about Macs or your Mac user estate, but again, being able to look at the behaviors kind of allows you to kind of start building questions of, should that guy working in finance have access to XXD, and should he be using it, and so on. So kind of similar scenario, but rather than building a table, you can start to use the attack navigator and actually start mapping to the different techniques. So again, you can, even if you have no knowledge of Mac, or even if you've got a small Mac estate, you can use this information to start looking at perhaps the key columns on this table, and then decide to, maybe you want to focus in on script execution and Apple script or whatever the case may be. You can use that approach. You can use the table approach for the ransomware table that I showed you. But the whole idea is, don't underestimate the LoL-Bins. They are being used all the time, at least from what we're seeing. And obviously, MITRE ATT&CK is your friend. So if you haven't heard of it, check it out. And that brings me to the end of my talk. So apologies for the technical problems. We made it. Any questions? If you don't want to ask me now, feel free to grab me outside.